hello, and welcome to the Unhinged Binge, a podcast wherein I, the host of this unhinged madness, go talk about mostly horror movies, but also Nicolas Cage and sometimes shark movies because it's unhinged and I talk about what I want to. Today I have, would you like to introduce yourself, co-host?
Sure. Hi, I am Kurt Hagens. You can find me all over the social media at Kurt Hagens, CurtHagens, and including YouTube, youtube.com/Kurt Hagens, where I make videos about pretty much whatever I want. I used to try to do the thing where I saw every movie and review it. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So just whatever I want to make videos about. Definitely, there is some horror stuff there for sure. Lots of Scream stuff. So if you're interested in that, and I do like a whole thing in October where I watch and review one horror movie every day. So, yep, that's me.
That's a lot. Okay,
Yeah.
so today we're going to be talking about the original 1980 Friday the 13th film. Reason being, one of the big three being Friday the 13th, Halloween, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, your big, late 70s, early 80s franchises. For me, I like Friday the 13th as a franchise, as a whole, the best. And you had said that you've only seen 3 of these movies, right? Which 3
Correct.
have you seen?
And that is still the case. Yes. That'll
Which 3?
change soon though. It's the original, the remake, and Freddy vs. Jason.
Okay, so I guess that would make sense. For a second, I thought that you'd seen Jason X. I'm like, oh, you went from 1 to 10?
No. No, I would not do
That'd be a
that.
choice. So, I definitely grew up watching these movies. I think it was Sci-Fi maybe used to, like, have play all of them. Might have been a different channel, but they used to play all of them on whatever, Friday the 13th. So I just kinda grew up watching them on whichever channel it was. Again, I think Sci-Fi. So, when did you first see was the first one or the remake or Freddy vs. Jason the first one you saw?
The original is the one that I watched first. And I think it was probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. I think it was senior year of high school. So I think we actually talked about this in the what makes a movie good thing. Most of what I watched as a kid was what my dad was showing me. So I think once I was like 13, started showing me R-rated movies, but that was mostly like action movies like Arnold and stuff. Then when I was 14 or 15, I think something like that, started showing me horror. And he did show me 2 of the big 3. He did show me Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween, but not Friday the 13th for whatever reason. I don't think he liked it as much. So I never got around to that one until like around my senior year of high school. Funny enough, I think I watched Scream a little bit before, so I went into this already knowing that Mrs. Voorhees was the killer and not Jason. So that was spoiled for me by Scream.
Tragic.
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to go through the movie, but before and kind of talk about the plot chronologically before that, I want to talk a bit about how it got made because this film is actually a lot more important than I think a lot of people give it credit for. I pulled a lot of like your basic information from just Wikipedia and Letterboxd, so like, release year and all that. But I did pull a lot about the background information from 2 books, being Real Terror, the scary, bloody, gory 100-year history of classic horror films by David No from 2012, and the teen slasher movie book by J.A. Kershwell from 2018. Okay. Now, if you had to take a guess, Kurt.
Yeah.
Like, you've already looked over my notes, but would you have assumed, like I did, falsely, that this movie was released on a Friday the 13th?
Absolutely, I would have assumed that, yeah.
And yet it is not. It was
Oh,
May 9th of 1980, which is a bit of a tragedy, which was made up for in sequel installments,
right.
But what a bummer.
I know, that's a huge missed opportunity. Like, come on.
And it was only 1 month off, and we'll talk about this at the end, what movie came out, like, 2 weeks after this movie.
Yep.
But, that I don't know if that maybe would have, like, been the case, because you don't hear as often about that kind of stuff in the 80s, about movies, like, switching their dates to avoid being released near another big movie. That just didn't happen as often back then, so I think it was just kind of a missed opportunity that they didn't really consider for whatever reason.
Yeah, I know. They were that close. Why not do it? I don't get it.
Exactly. So this movie was written by a gentleman by the name of Victor Miller. I don't really know what else he's worked on very much. It was directed by Sean S. Cunningham. Are you familiar with Sean S. Cunningham?
Uh, just from what you said about him in your notes, that's literally all I know.
Right. So he also direct or I'm sorry, he didn't direct. He produced the House movies, which if I'm being honest, I like House 2, the second story, the most, but House 1's pretty fun with the gentleman from The Greatest American Hero. And he worked on being a producer, The Last House on the Left with Wes Craven in 1972, and that's probably like the most prominent film he did. This film was produced by Cunningham as well as Steve Miner. Steve Miner went on to direct. If you're a horror fan, you know Steve Miner. He directed Friday the 13th Part 3, Halloween H2O, Lake Placid, and quite a number of other films. Although oddly enough, then he veered into like kind of happy-esque movies like Big Bully
Huh.
with Rick Moranis. I'm like the one person who knows that movie. Forever Young with a very young Elijah Wood and Mel Gibson. Yeah. But probably most importantly, the film had special effects by Tom Savini
Yep.
and music by Harry Manfredini, which it's a horror movie. That's kind of what makes a horror movie. Like everything else can kind of fail. The effects and the music, if they work, the movie works.
Yep.
Horror's so simple. Now, I'll be honest, when it comes to the people in the movie, the only person I know actor-wise is Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon. Yeah, same here.
But the
And
big get was Betsy Palmer.
and I had actually forgotten that Kevin Bacon was in the movie.
Oh,
And when I rewatched it, I didn't even recognize him. So I looked at the cast afterwards. I'm like, oh yeah, that was him. Just completely slipped my mind. And yeah, Betsy Palmer's great as well.
he's so young in it.
I know.
I could definitely see that. So I
Yeah.
love that so many actors get their start in horror movies. It's
Yes.
so fun. Although I think the one that he's most embarrassed about is Tremors, which
Really?
a bit of a bummer because I love
Yeah,
Tremors.
Tremors is awesome. I don't know why you'd be embarrassed of that. It's a really fun
Okay,
movie.
it is. So earlier I said Sean S. Cunningham had worked with Wes Craven on Last House on the Left. Have you seen Last House on the Left?
I have not, but I'd like to. I mean, I love
I'm
Wes Craven, so
I wouldn't recommend it at all.
to me or in general.
In general,
Really?
I would definitely say this is one of those cases where the remake is a far superior film.
Okay.
The Last House on the Left is the definition of an exploitation film, or
Oh,
as I wrote, it's a gritty proto slasher exploitation film. And
right.
Craven
Okay.
said, and I'm quoting him through the book Roll Terror,
Hmm.
I'm going to make a film where I don't cut away. I won't make it look operatic or balletic. They're going to get shot and scream and crawl because that's what violence is. It's horrendously
Uh,
messy. It has perverted sexual side to it.
ah.
So basically, it's saying that to make this violence real, it has to be graphic and offensive. It's a shocking truth because back prior to, I mean, this is 1972, the Hays Code only ended in the late 60s. We didn't get the rating system until 68.
I'm sorry, the what? Ended in the
Oh,
60s?
the Hays Code, the production code.
Oh,
So
okay.
the movie rating system, which would nowadays be PG-13, PG.
Hmm.
I did this out order way wrong. Let me try that
Whatever.
again.
It's fine.
R X now is NC-17.
Hmm.
That didn't come about and get instituted into that didn't come about until 1968.
Okay.
So prior to that, there were very strict rules about what could or could not be in a movie.
Right.
Last House on the Left could not be made prior to 1968. It simply would not have gone through with any kind of rating. Well, I guess it could be made, but then we get into like economic censorship, and
Hmm.
it wouldn't have been in theaters, essentially.
Gotcha.
NATO, which is North American Theater Owners, would not have distributed that film in their theaters. But the movie, it is very grimy. There's overt like depictions of assaults. Other films of that era that I would compare it to would be like I Spit on Your Grave, being very like hard to watch, but also it's 70s. Like the acting is bad, the movie looks
Mm.
bad, it's very cheap, and it has what I would call a porn soundtrack where it has like the walk, walk,
Oh, geez. Well,
like the
now
music is bad.
now I'm not so interested now that you've said all this. Who
No,
did the remake? Do you know?
the remake, I actually quite like that film, and I could tell you exactly when it came out because that's the R-rated movie I went to see on my 17th birthday.
Oh,
So it was
nice.
2009.
Legally, right?
Yeah, yeah. It came I saw that and The Watchmen because those are the
Ah,
2 R-rated movies in the theater at the time. That was a horrible way to spend my 17th birthday.
yeah, the first movie I saw in theaters when I was 17 was We're the Millers,
A
which I
much
liked. It
better
was
film.
fun. Yeah.
But Craven goes on to explain about exploitation. They're made by the disenfranchised people. They tend to be younger, and they often have very little to lose about telling the truth. And, I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. I think, as you get older, you probably just don't want to depict that kind of violence. You probably don't have that anger, right? It's similar to like music. The younger people tend to be the disenfranchised people making
Sure.
rock and, grunge and then whatever the new thing is that's, more angry.
Hmm.
That's just the truth of art, I suppose. So after The Last House on the Left, Cunningham and Craven kind of went their own ways. I don't think there's any kind of falling out. They just decided to do different things, but both of them have had, wanted to do something a little different because that movie is a lot. Like that movie it is very hard to watch, and I'm sure it was very hard to make. So Raven kind of kept it in going like grittier horror movies, and he went on to do stuff like The Hills Have Eyes, pretty, not that long after. Whereas Cunningham took a lighter route, and I know Friday the 13th may not seem like a lighter route, but when you're comparing it to The Last House on the Left, it definitely is lighter. I think you've seen a couple kind of grittier French films, right?
I don't know that I have. Like, what
Oh,
are
we
some
just talked
examples?
about it, and I tried to steer you clear, maybe.
Like what? Like,
I know you're
what was
talking about
that
like
one?
High Tension.
High Tension. Yeah, you
Yeah,
watched it.
I
I
watched
didn't.
it, and I think I
Yeah.
told you not to.
Right. Yep. Because I was curious about it, and then you watched it because of that, and you're like, you shouldn't watch it. I'm like, all right.
No, no, no. If you're gonna watch a French film, I would like a French like extremity film. I would say Martyrs is probably
Okay.
the best, but it's a lot. Like it says to Hellraiser, hold my beer. But yeah, so Cunningham wanted to do something a little bit lighter, so he kind of decided, I'm paraphrasing from Real Terror, the book, that he wanted to make a roller coaster ride. He wanted audiences to essentially enjoy being scared. I think that kind of comes across in this movie.
Hmm.
It's a little bit, it's not lighthearted per se, but it's definitely, you don't feel like you've just ran a marathon after watching it.
No, you're not exhausted. Yeah, like you are with some other ones.
So as a producer, for people who don't know what a producer does, I'm gonna be honest, I don't either, but he's essentially a salesman. You're right. So why Halloween got made, or sorry, no, why Friday the 13th got made is because of Halloween. You're selling a title essentially. Like the title of the movie sells itself. In the VHS era, I can't enunciate today.
No
A lot
worries.
of movies could really get rented and watched because of the cover art. So a lot of filmmakers, really went out of their way to ensure that the cover looked good. And same for, in this era, and even today, these are still truths, but a title can really sell a movie.
Well, I know it works for you because whenever you see a cool poster or a cool or funny title, I know you're going to watch the movie. So
Like, come on, you don't see a movie called Armageddon and need to know what's gonna happen.
you have to. Yep. You have to.
You gotta know. You gotta
Yep.
know. Shout out to Lamageddon. Slaughterhouse is just one of the best names for a movie. I'm sorry, it just is.
Agreed.
Sharknado, priceless.
Perfect.
Genius. So, okay, going back to Halloween. I know you've seen Halloween.
Yes.
All right, 1978 film directed by John Carpenter on a really low budget.
Hmm.
Somewhere, okay, different things report different numbers, but we're going to say in the ballpark of the $300,000 range. So definitely under 400,000, maybe a bit over 300,000. but it went on to gross over $70 million worldwide. It was at the time and for a long time after the most successful independent film of all time. And the cool thing about horror movies is they're super low risk. Generally, they are very cheaply made and can end up grossing a huge numbers in the box office. So a lot of studios kind of learn from Halloween at this point that
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a cash grab. This is easy. Why not?
Blumhouse. Yeah, Blumhouse these days literally will put out anything and they'll make a bunch of money.
That is true. People love horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
So Cunningham, this guy, he saw Halloween and got the idea for Friday the 13th, the title. That was it. He got the idea for the title. And he calls Miller, the writer, and says, let's just rip this off. And go so far as to put an ad out in the paper, kind of advertising Friday the 13th, before the script is even written, mind you, just to see if he's going to get like a cease and desist or anything like that, because that was, I guess, a cheap way to see if the title was taken.
Mm.
I'm assuming there were easier ways. I've never heard of anyone else doing it this way.
Yeah,
And
that's kind of a
I'm pretty
strange
sure you
tactic.
can just go see like if the title's been used
Right.
somehow, some other way. But it's also important to know that these are New York guys. They're not in LA and they don't film this movie in LA. So, the casting is all done in New York. They shoot it in Jersey or kind of all over Jersey, but specifically at a camp. And I'm going to try to pronounce this. Novi Bosco is how I would say it. But I guess it's a camp. I mean, as of 2018, it was still a running camp. Post 2020, I don't know if it's still in use or not. But I mean, they were just shooting there on the off season, I guess, which is kind of cool, I think. So anyway, I guess the idea came from like holiday horror is a good idea, which I think it is. Do you know how many
Absolutely.
holiday horror movies I've seen? Usually they're Christmas ones. I don't know what it is about Christmas. I guess they like to subverting the expectation of a happy holiday.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now on the surface, do you think Halloween or Friday the 13th would make like a good like premise for a horror movie? Because Halloween, you have not necessarily like tradition, but you have the idea of people being in masks and trying to be scary. But Friday the 13th inherently is supposed to be like an unlucky day, right?
Are you asking like just based on the title?
Just based on the title.
Which one I would think would make, just without knowing what I know about the movies now? I don't know, because they're both really good. Honestly, if I had to pick, I probably would say Friday the 13th is the slightly better title.
No, but like globally, then that gets into an interesting question, because I don't know if Friday the 13th is like is something that's like more of the US or like Western
Yeah,
type of
that's
a bad luck thing.
I'm not sure. That's a really good question. Yeah, if it's
Then
not,
again, Halloween is definitely US.
yeah, it is.
Huh. Well, who knows? Okay, so Miller wasn't really familiar. That's the writer. Wasn't really familiar with like horror movies. So Cunningham had him go see Halloween a few times, and he had a few takeaways that you can definitely see incorporated into the film, such as it's important to have a prior evil, meaning an original sin. I'm going to talk about that when we get into the movie, though. He wanted to cast like young, what he calls Pepsi generation kids. I don't know what that means, if I'm being honest, but just like young, good-looking cast. And then he wanted to justify why people would be going off on their own, and people wouldn't be looking for them once they've gone off on their own and gotten killed.
Right.
And then his takeaway was, you have sex, you die, which is definitely not what Carpenter intended, unfortunately. So they, kind of decided to make this the premise of the film, establish a remote location and put young people in jeopardy, or so says Real Terror. Which, yeah, horror. I think you've seen enough horror movies to know that, and I don't think you need to see many just in general, but you specifically, I've seen enough to know that horror movies are kind of dependent on isolationism.
Absolutely.
Because if you have a situation where people could easily get help, you don't have a movie.
Yep.
Which is why I think it's really difficult to make slashers today. And that even today, having people be in the woods is a great location.
Yep. The
And
what? Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the woods, like cabins and campgrounds and stuff, is just really creepy in general. Like my parents have a cabin in northern Wisconsin, which is really cool. I like going there, but I also get kind of freaked out sometimes. It definitely is pretty creepy, and it's a great setting for a horror movie. No wonder they've done so many of them. You know,
Well, see,
Cabin in the Woods made like a parody of it because they've done so many.
that was a bit more of a parody of Evil Dead, but
Well,
yes.
yeah, but
Absolutely, and actually, this is kind of one of the first movies that did that ever.
mhm,
In the 1920s through 60s, horror was very more ingrained in like gothic horror and based more in books and novels. It was a monster. It was the horror from within
mhm,
or the mad scientists and maybe ghosts. And generally, it wasn't a place. And if it was a place, it's a haunted house. That the 60s, with the loss of the Hays Code, which I talked about a little earlier, and the rise of we didn't have the word for it yet, but serial killers, which I think that term wasn't coined until like 74, maybe.
really?
Um, yeah,
Huh.
we get slasher movies. Like, I mean, we've had proto slashers, but the first real like slasher movie, like modern slasher movie, is Halloween.
Mhm,
But we've had important ones that kind of set the guidelines, like Psycho and Peeping Tom and Black Christmas. But really, it's Psycho and then Halloween. And there's not a lot of mainstream movies that a lot of people were watching, and that's the important thing. I know Peeping Tom and Black Christmas and all these movies deserve credit, but that's not what people were watching, and more to the point, that's not what people were ripping off.
right.
That's not what people were seeing as being like something to take and learn from and move forward with. But Psycho and Halloween were. And so with camp horror and having the terror of going into the woods, that kind of becomes its own subgenre not until here with this. And there have been a few other like woods movies, like out in the woods movies, like I Spit on Your Grave, Last House on the Left, Deliverance, kind of tourist trap, but like having people be at like a campsite. That's this movie. That's what started it. And like I said, it did create its own little subgenre. We've had like comedies. I don't know if you've seen Meatballs.
Nope.
No, it says 79. It's with Bill Murray, a whole bunch of other people. Honestly, I thought it was kind of forgettable. I don't really like it that much, but it's fine. But that's like kind of one of the earliest like camp movies. And I don't know, like I've never been to camp. I don't know anyone who has. I feel like maybe that is more of an East Coast thing, maybe. Uh, but there was like a rise of movies being made about camps, and yet
Mhm,
I don't think many people go to camp. It's very strange. It must have been more popular back in the day,
yeah. Not
or
now though.
they just pulled it from this movie.
Could be.
But another important thing that this movie had going for it was teenagers. I think they're supposed to be teenagers,
Mhm,
which Halloween, there have been movies about teenagers and like movies where like teenagers group together and stuff. And kind of starting in I guess the 50s or 60s with like The Blob or Rebel Without a Cause, stuff like that. But in horror movies, it's usually about a singular teen, like Carrie, for Halloween, and I really looked. I did a deep dive. I'm like searching through Letterboxd, right? Halloween's really the first movie I can find with a group of teenagers are getting picked off kind of one by one. And so Friday the 13th was kind of the continuation of that and what I think a lot of what Halloween started, Friday the 13th cemented as trope.
well, I mean, the director literally admitted that they set out to make a movie just like Halloween. Basically, he said that he ripped it off, right?
He said
So,
it explicitly,
yeah.
those words.
Yep.
So anyway, they write the script and it's they get Steve Miner as the producer. They got together. So I've seen like varying reports and I'm a little bit confused about specifically what happened, but the budget for the film itself is around $500,000. They cast in New York, they film in Jersey. In 79, it comes out in May. But the film has an interesting thing with it is the first independent slasher to get picked up by a major studio. It was picked up by Paramount, which added, again, I'm seeing varying reports, but I'm just going to go with what Wikipedia said, which is around another $1 million for advertising. So they almost doubled the budget for the advertising. Plus, I think
Mhm.
they paid about $1.5 million to buy the rights to distribute the film. So already they've made their money back. And even if Paramount spent, I think, 2.5 million on the movie, it definitely grossed more than that in the box office. So
Oh
let's
yeah.
say max $3 million is spent in total with advertising on this movie. In the US alone, it's distributed wide distribution, and I'm just going based on what Wikipedia says, which is over 1,100 theaters, which is pretty impressive for the time, given this is 1980. Domestically, it grosses over $39 million, and in the worldwide, it grosses around $59 million, almost $60 million
Nice.
on a total budget with advertising of $3 million, give or take.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's really good for a horror movie in 1980 for sure.
Yes. And that's why, after Halloween, Friday the 13th is probably the most famous outright slasher movie
Hmm.
of the 80s. And that's not because it's the best by any means, but it's because it is the one that is widely distributed. So that's the one that people were able to see
Right.
and find as easily. Because again, this is pre like VHS and stuff like that. It's even pre Betamax. And the last thing I think we need to talk about before we get into the movie itself is the rating. It had R rating. And that came back to be an issue. Like I said, the rating system wasn't established until 1968. So they were rating this in 79. And I guess they hadn't got the kinks worked out. Because back at that time, it was essentially P, PG, R, and X. So those were your only things. And a lot of people got very upset that it didn't get an X rating, that it only got an R rating, because Tom Savini's effects were pretty damn good. And they really wanted to have the audience see the blood and stuff, because in Halloween, they kind of didn't show a lot of the blood.
That's
And
that's surprising because like watching it now through today's lens, it's pretty tame. To think that they back then like wanted it to be X instead of R is pretty crazy to think about. Like it just doesn't seem like that gory now, you know?
well, I mean, coming off of not allowing really any of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, this is only, 11 years, right? 68 to 79, 11 years. So
I mean,
much.
did Texas Chainsaw Massacre really not like show any gore or anything?
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is 74,
Yeah.
and they actually did cut away. They
Oh,
had a
okay.
lot. In fact, they really wanted to get a PG rating.
Oh,
Um, and they didn't show a lot of blood. They might
okay.
show what they show you is what you can insinuate is going to happen. But I think
Right.
in addition is, I don't know who did the effects. I want to say it wasn't Dick Smith, was it?
Don't
I
ask
can't
me. I don't
remember.
know.
I doubt it was. But anyway, I I I don't know if they necessarily had a way to do a chainsaw going through someone and show that with
Right.
the effects artists they had necessarily in the budget that they had.
Right.
Now, nowadays, you can definitely do that. Like, look
Mhm.
at Terrifier, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can 100% do that. But in 1974, with their budget, I don't know, and the time frame they were doing it on, I don't necessarily know if that was something that was available for them to do.
Huh.
They had like the chainsaw going, and then, you would see nothing. You wouldn't see like gore or anything like that.
Interesting. I guess I'm remembering it gorier than it actually was.
I think most people
I've only seen
do.
it once. So,
It's a gross movie.
yeah.
Like I don't know if what I'm going to describe is going to make any sense, but it's a movie that when you're watching it, you could smell it through the screen.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I totally get what you're saying with that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people working on the film actually got
It
pretty
makes you
sick
feel
'cause
really
it
icky. Yeah.
hot. Yeah, it looks like you're gonna get some sort of infection watching
Mhm.
it. So it's definitely a gross movie, but I think the worst thing you see is someone going through getting stabbed through a hook to
Oh,
be kind of hung up.
okay.
I don't. There's a word for these hooks, but
A
it's something like
meat
you would
hook?
string a deer up on.
Oh,
Maybe
cleaver? Is that what you're talking about?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just know it's a big hook, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's holding a person's weight. It
I,
goes in through the rib cage.
yep. Yep. I remember that.
Yeah, so I think that's like the most graphic thing you see, and you see the person kind of hanging there. But yeah, the movie, I mean, I personally think it's pretty graphic, but that's also because chainsaws freak me out. So just having the chainsaw on the
Chainsaws are really scary.
they are. They
And
are. Man.
I can't help but think of that scene from Terrifier now whenever I think of a chainsaw. So
Actually, this is stupid that I know this. So, the last house on the left was the first time someone used a chainsaw to kill someone in a horror movie, or that's what
okay.
the book said, and I'm pretty sure that's right because I can't think of anything that happened, before that.
Wait, actually, I think it was a regular. Was it a regular saw or chainsaw in Terrifier? It might have been a regular saw.
It's a bone saw.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. That's
Yeah,
even worse, I think, for that particular scene.
but I'm thinking of like the prosthetic they
Yeah,
used.
yeah, yeah. Yep.
Like, yeah, it was really good. It's very
Hmm.
well done. I looked away a lot.
Yep.
Anyway, people were really mad going back to this. People were really mad that it got an R rating, and that actually really ends up screwing them over because a lot of other horror movies, people making horror movies were, holding it up as an example and like, well, you gave Friday the 13th an R rating and they did this, so we
Right.
should get an R rating because we're just doing this. So going forward, the MPA was very critical of the Friday the 13th sequels, and it's noticeable.
Oh, great.
And yeah, so but yeah. Okay, so goodness. I guess we can get into the movie now.
Let's do it.
Okay. So the movie opens on a full moon, and this comes into play a lot. I had forgotten how much the full moon came into play in this movie. We see the moon a lot. I guess they're very proud of their ability to get the moon looking so nice on camera. We're in the woods. We hear people singing, and we transition into a cabin where some youngsters, maybe early 20s, late teens, are sitting inside on a campfire, singing a song. Two people go off. We learn it's Camp Crystal Lake, 1958. We're getting POV shots. We go through a cabin upstairs. We're following these kids. Manfredi's score is playing. It's set in a great atmosphere. We have two camp counselors, Barry and Claudette. They're kissing. They're laying down. They're getting intimate. Someone comes upstairs. Barry gets got. He gets dead. First death of the movie. And then we have the person who we do not see stalking Claudette, who's trying to sort of fight the killer off. And in slow motion, she screams, and we cut to the title of Friday the 13th in 3D letters coming towards the camera, shattering the glass. I don't understand the title sequence, but I will say it looks awesome and is super memorable.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the opening scene. I think that this was in your notes. I think the director said it. I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of we wanted to like have something bad happen in the opening scene to like set the tone for the rest of the movie, and it certainly does that. And I love the POV shot. I think it's really cool, and the score is really good. That's something that I noticed right away as well. I'm a big score guy, so I really appreciate a good score.
You know what's actually kind of important about score?
Yeah,
So, in terms of horror movies, just watching as many horror movies as I have, and I mentioned this just a little while ago with Last House on the Left with their like porno, like ill-fitting score. Horror movies didn't really have good music in them until Jaws, and even
right.
then, it was still pretty rare. Halloween was as Jeff and I mean John Carpenter is so talented a musician anyway,
Yep.
but he really I think Jaws and Halloween in the 70s really set the bar for needing a good score for a horror movie.
Hmm.
And I think that Friday the 13th definitely hit the bar.
Yeah, it's great. It certainly matches the like tension you're supposed to be feeling.
So it's actually Hitchcock had these principles, which I read about in Real Terror. And one of them is do something horrible in the first reel to
Yes.
leave the audience dreading. And so I
Hmm.
call that, I mean, generally, what it is literally is the first kill.
Yep.
Um, in Halloween, it's described as an original sin, and that's when Michael kills his sister.
Right.
And in here, the original sin is actually going to be the killer is going to describe what the original sin is, and a little later,
Yep.
it's a revenge story.
Yep.
But we establish audience expectation and we let them know like what's going to happen. But it's also, and this is just personal opinion, I think it gives the writers a chance to not just let the audience know what's going to happen and to have a sense of dread throughout the film, but then it gives you ample time to get the characters to get to know and get invested in the main characters that you're actually going to be following before we start killing them off. So we
Right.
have a kill, then we have some time to like relax and maybe have some kind of like jump scares, some startle moments before we actually really, really start killing people and ramping things up.
Yep.
So it's a good way to set a pace, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Set the tone for the movie. Yep.
Yep, yep. So then we cut to forward 22 years to present day June 13th, and I looked it up. So June 13th was 1980. I wanted to make sure because I'm like, is it 78? Is it 79? Is it 80? I'm not 100% sure. It was 1980. So we have a girl named Annie who's walking through the town of Crystal Lake with a backpack. She stops into, I guess it's supposed to be like a diner or a bodega or a gas station. I
I
don't
think it
know,
was like a
man.
gas station. Yeah.
But they have like a diner in it. It's
I
a
don't
little
know.
confusing. Small towns, I
Yeah.
don't get them. Anyway, so she goes in and asks how far is it to Camp Crystal Lake, and a lot of people look kind of surprised and a little shocked. And one person asks, "Camp Blood, they're open that place again?" I like that it's called by the town Camp Blood. Oftentimes in camp horror movies, we have like a campfire story at the opening, and
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna do that in the sequels. That it like this story is going to become a legend that's told, but I I think that's kind of necessary for a camp movie, and it's a little bit of a bummer when you don't get those ghost story openings.
And I love how like the surrounding characters in the movie are uneasy about that place, and it makes the audience uneasy about it. We're like, oh, what's wrong with there? Why don't they want them to go there? You know?
Very, very true. We have a truck driver named Enos, which
Yep.
was a very odd name for me, gives Annie a ride about halfway towards Crystal Lake, which is 20 miles. So this girl still has like like a 10-mile hitchhike or hike, which is unfortunate. But they before that they meet Crazy Ralph, who
Mm-hmm.
says, "You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you? You'll never come back again. It's got a death curse." And this is, ah, I don't know if he would be considered the first harbinger of doom, but he's probably the most famous harbinger of doom in a horror movie, I think.
Is that's like I assume that's like someone who like warns everyone. Okay, yeah.
Hmm.
He's got to be the most famous one.
Yeah, for sure. But you do see a lot, particularly in Stephen King adaptations. And I don't know what that is about, but you'll see a lot of like people at gas stations warning people to turn back and go back the way they came. Don't
Yep.
go that way.
They
Or
do that.
maybe I've just seen Children of the Corn too many times.
Don't they do that in Scooby Doo sometimes too? I definitely feel like they have. I can't think of a specific one, but I feel like they have.
Maybe. Like, there are a
Yeah.
lot of, like when you watch a horror movie, there are definitely some Scooby-Doo rules that people violate, and
Mm-hmm.
then they get got.
Yep.
Anyway, we then cut to we get to learn a little bit about the history of Crystal Lake from Enos. So, Steve Christie owns Camp Crystal Lake. We get to know that there was 2 people murdered in '58, which we saw in the opening. Before that, the year before, there was a boy who drowned. There have been a bunch of fires. In 1962, they were going to reopen the camp and the water was bad. I don't know what the water was bad means, but I'll take him at his word. Like the lake had something wrong with it, or like the drinking water had something wrong with it. I just have many follow-up questions. And like, what was wrong with it? Like, from 1962 to 1980, you have an 18-year period. Did they fix the water? What's going on with the water? I'm very concerned about the water. Lakes are pretty still. There's a lot of room to get infections.
Yep.
Anyway, Enos goes on to say, like, Christy will wind up broke like his folks. I don't know if they necessarily really, really explain it well that like people would get it, but for people who don't know, so the Christie family has owned Camp Crystal Lake for quite some time. His parents owned it before him. He's inherited it. I'm assuming they've passed away, and that's why it is fully come into his ownership and he's trying to open it. Because I don't know how old Steve Christie is supposed to be, but I'm assuming late 30s.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. So it's been about 18 years since anyone's any seriously tried to reopen the lake, which was established in 1935. So it clearly, from 35 to 58, it had seemingly 22 years of like, running strong.
Everything was great. Yeah.
And then a little boy drowned in, 57, and it all went to
Yep.
hell. All right, so then we meet three new characters driving in a truck, seemingly having a good time, which are Marcy, Jack, and Ned. Who Jack is played by young Kevin Bacon. He's dating Marcy. They're having a little bit of kind of a pervy talk, but seemingly enjoying their ride. They get to Crystal Lake. They meet Steve Christie. Can we talk about Steve Christie's outfit for a second?
Yeah.
I don't know what this man is wearing. He's shirtless. He has a red bandana tied around his neck like an ascot. He's wearing cut off jeans. They're not like short shorts like you'll see in the 70s in the 70s and 80s,
Mm-hmm.
but they're cut off jean shorts. But then he's wearing boots with what look like to be very thick red wool socks.
It's quite
I
the
just don't know what's
choice.
happening. Yes, it is a choice. But yeah, he's cutting down some wood. He's cutting down a tree or a tree stump. They're coming to help him. Alice is already there. I got the impression that Alice and Steve maybe had some romantic entanglement.
Yeah, I got that impression too.
And then we learned Bill is cleaning the boathouse. So we have an established finite number of young characters. Steve Christie's the owner, clearly oldest. Then we have Marcy, Jack, Ned, Alice, and Bill. I don't know about you, but I was getting Ned and Bill confused a lot.
Well, I forgot almost all the characters' names except for Alice. So thank you for reminding me because
There.
they're not super memorable, to be
So
honest.
Ned is the kind of jokester.
Okay.
And Bill is he's the kind of more responsible one.
Okay.
But they're both like curly hair, like brown curly hair, about the same height, kind of similar faces. There's a reason that we don't cast people that look alike.
Yep.
Kevin Bacon looks dramatically different, so you can kind of tell them apart. There's another girl who's going to be introduced, Brenda. Marcy, Alice, and Brenda all look pretty different, so it's easy to kind of tell them apart, though I can totally understand not necessarily remembering whose name is whose.
Marcy is the one that is dating Kevin Bacon, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Alice is, kind of the mainish character, and
Yep.
Brenda's the tall one.
Okay.
All right. So, we learned very quickly that they have a lot of work to do. The campus opening in 2 weeks. So we're not going to have any children in this movie. I want to underline that because it's going to be something that we're going to see in a lot of these films. We're not going to have any kids at this camp. I'm like, why would we have kids at camp? But I do.
Well, because it's not open yet, so.
Because we don't want to pay to have children.
Yeah.
Which is smart. But also with this, it's kind of like The Thing, where we have a very finite number of people who are going to get picked off by a serial killer.
Yep.
So we have Steve and Alice talking about her artwork. It's kind of flirtatious. She's a little bit kind of on edge about staying to actually be there for the camp opening. She's thinking about leaving early, but promises to stay for the week. She goes to find Bill. Now, the camera, when Alice is running through the woods, the camera is very much, you get the sense that the camera is watching her. The score is playing. It feels very, I wrote predatory.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it.
Yes. It's very much a POV shot. I don't necessarily know if it's from the killer's point of view yet, but the camera always has this feeling of being, I said documentary style. And I think that is a way to make it feel more realistic for the audience. And so you feel more concerned about what's going to happen. And then when you get to the violence itself and the kills, I think because we're not cutting away, we're actually seeing like realistic actions and like this more violent interpretation of not cutting away and making the viewer watch what's happening like the killer is doing. I think it gives a feeling of being a little bit more kind of scary than a lot of other horror movies were at the time.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about the shot because I think it's a really cool shot. And I actually, at first, I thought it was the killer or Mrs. Voorhees in right there behind the trees, but I don't think it was because Alice, sorry, kind of walks right by the trees and doesn't notice anyone. So I don't think it actually is. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
there are times where I'm noting, like, I think they're trying to set this person up to be, like, maybe they're the killer, but it's obviously that they're not because we know
Right.
where the killer is at this time,
Yep.
or we know what the killer is doing or driving. So I'm like, I don't like. I feel like they tried to make Crazy Ralph seem like a potential threat, and like maybe he's the killer, but
Well,
we know the killer has a Jeep.
but I'm saying in that particular scene, there was actually nobody there, right?
Yeah, there's no one there.
Okay, but it kind of at first made it seem like there might have been, and I thought that was
Yeah,
pretty cool.
and it's definitely like I've definitely seen horror movies where the cinematography is just really amateurish and
Hmm.
they've just not heard of, a tripod yet.
Yep.
Right? Steadicam, we don't know her. But this it is definitely done with purpose.
Oh, it's
It's
very
very
deliberate for
intentional.
sure. Yeah,
And I do think, having it be that kind of like handheld style, it does add to the tension of the film because it
for
seems like
sure.
something's gonna happen.
Yep.
And because we already have had POV shots, it's almost like you're hiding the like Michael Myers is, you can kind of see it in the background. But in this case, you're in the point of view of the killer,
Hmm.
even though it's a fake out.
And you're kind of associating the POV shots with like the killer or
A
bad
hundred
things happening
percent. Or
because
like
that's what happened in the opening scene.
it's like the leitmotif of the music. Like when the
Hmm.
music starts playing, you think necessarily because the music plays when something happens that
Yep.
well, the music playing, something's gonna happen, but
Right.
it's not. It's just trying to psych you out, and it works at keeping the tension being built, even though nothing's actually happening. Someone's just walking through the woods. This is actually in any other movie. This is a really boring moment that you should cut away from. But
Right.
here, it works, and it's something that you absolutely should hold on.
Yeah, I think if the movie didn't do the POV shots in the way it did and it was shot the way it was, and if the score wasn't that good, it almost wouldn't work at all. Like those
Yeah,
are what makes the movie work.
exactly. 100%. All right. So we get introduced to Brenda, and we learn that Steve is going into town and they're still waiting on Annie. So she has not shown up yet. And he wants everything done because there's supposed to be a rainstorm tonight. So he wants to make sure that we're all going to avoid this and everything's set up and ready to go before the rain gets there. So we really specifically know who's in our pretty small finite cast, so who the
Mhm.
potential like victim pool is going to be, which I like.
Yeah.
Like I know you're a fan of Scream, but when
Yep.
you have a huge party, you assume the only people you care about in terms of deaths are your main characters,
Yep.
but you don't know who in this party is actually going to live or die. There's just so many victims, and I think that kind of takes away because it's like, well, if party goer number 8 gets killed off, like I don't really care
We
about
don't care,
them.
right? Because we don't know them. Yeah.
Then it almost makes it like more difficult during the party to kill someone. So you're just like, what are we doing here? A
Sure.
little bit. Whereas here it's like it's a big place and in a small number of people. What could happen?
Yep. This
I
is
like,
kind of more like I think you already made comparisons to The Thing earlier, but it's kind of like that.
yeah, absolutely. Although I will say the thing has like one of the. I mean, if we're talking like hardest movie monsters to defeat, I think it's this
Oh,
and the zombies from Return of the Living Dead.
yeah.
Like nothing defeats them. They're doomed. Just like Ralph said, they're all doomed.
Yep.
Marcy makes a joke about snakes, which is really sad foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Then we have Brenda kind of setting up some archery stuff and is nearly hit by an arrow. And this is where we learn that Ned is kind of the prankster, which I gotta say, never in horror movies, we so often see a prankster character, but in real life, no one would be this guy's friends.
Nope.
Someone would have hit him.
Definitely
Like,
not.
you
Yep.
shot an arrow at me, I'm slapping you in the face. No one's laughing that off.
Yeah, that's not cool. If you do that to me, I'm probably leaving. I'm like, fuck this.
Yeah, that stunt was really, like, I thought pretty crazy.
Hmm.
But
And it
apparently,
was done by
Tom
who
Savini,
right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
he Would you say shot the arrow?
Yeah, shot the arrow. Yeah.
Yeah, he shot the arrow. Yeah, it just seemed like kind of a dumb, unnecessary stunt. But clearly, it's not a jump scare, but it's still there to hold attention while no one's actually getting killed off.
Right. Yep. And it accomplishes that. So
Definitely. But then she forgives Ned so easily, which is no. Anyway,
yeah.
we cut back to Annie. She's getting a ride from someone we don't see in a dark green Jeep. The driver misses a turn, and our sinister music starts playing. Annie is getting afraid, so she jumps out of the pretty fast moving vehicle. I mean, smart move. Like, she gets up and starts running, even though she's injured.
hmm
And she seems to be not going in a straight line, which apparently you're not supposed to do. I don't know if you're never supposed to do that or you're just not supposed to do this. Someone has a firearm, but I know you're not, in theory, supposed to do that. So good for her. She's making all the smart moves. She still gets found and she still gets killed. She has her throat slit, and we do see it in kind of all the graphic, gory details. And I'll add even that not only that, but we're seeing this scene in full daytime lighting, which is a lot of practical effects artists hate doing stuff like that. So shout out to Tom Savini. Although unfortunately, with restorations and technology coming a long way, sometimes they really fuck up when they do that, and they make things too visible. So what plays out really well in, like, let's say 1980, when you have these restorations and they're bringing up resolution and visibility, then effects that were never seen before, like bad effects were never seen before, become visible, which
Right.
is, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that they did a pretty good prosthetic, and it does blend in pretty well with their skin.
hmm
So even like with restorations, that still looks like a really good effect, I think.
Yeah. I thought the throat slash effect was pretty good. And I thought this is a really intense scene. And especially because we can't see who the killer is. And even when it's not the POV shots, they shoot in a very specific way to where they make sure that we can't see the killer. They do a really good job of that throughout the movie. I thought it was really cool.
And well thought out. I think they did a
Yep.
good job.
Yep.
But I wanted to note in terms of, like, so we have a kill count at 3 at this
hmm
point. And I wanted to note the first 2 was a sex equals death in the opening.
Oh,
Here
okay.
we have no sex and we have an on-screen death, which is pretty
Yeah.
important.
Okay.
Just want to note that.
Yep.
We'll talk about it later.
Yep.
All right. So then we cut back to our, youths, Brenda, Ned, Jack, Marcy, Alice, and Bill, who are going swimming. Ted keeps playing around. I mean, he goes full on Cameron Fry from Ferris Bueller Days Off and pretends to drown. I'm sorry, man. He's getting hit. There's no way they're friends with this guy.
Yeah, that was so messed up. And I think when I was watching it the other night, I said out loud, "Oh, he just did a squints." Like
Yes,
from
100%.
Sandlot.
100%.
Yeah,
But with
that's so not
Squints,
cool.
okay, with Squints, he'd been planning it for years. It was very specifically
Sure.
to get a kiss, which is not appropriate, but he's like, what, 12? It's fine.
Right.
He's not, how old are these kids supposed to be? I mean,
Uh
18, 19,
something like
20.
that. Yeah.
You know? He's old enough to know better. That's a no.
Oh, I know. I'm not saying like it's the exact same thing, but
I'm just pointing
that's just
out.
what I thought of when it
Shame on
happened.
that.
That's what my mind jumped to.
Then Alice, she finds a snake in her room. Everyone comes in, and Bill kills the snake. I'll spare you a trip. I made this joke. I spare you a trip to doesthesnakedie.com. Snake does die. Mean, unnecessary,
I
didn't
know.
need to do it. And so I don't know. I've heard this story throughout the time. I don't know where it originated, but just so supposedly Tom Savini borrowed a snake from a friend, and he didn't tell him they were going to kill the snake.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, so they killed a real snake?
Oh yeah,
Oh no.
and
Why
like
would they do that?
supposedly it's someone's pet. I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, that's a douche move. Tom
that
Savini
is
would not be my friend after that.
that is really not cool. And it already annoyed me even before I knew that they killed a real snake. Like just within the movie, I'm like, is this necessary?
Yeah,
But
and
now
also
that I
it's just
know that
it's
it's
just a
real,
little. It's a black snake.
yeah, it's not gonna do anything. Like
Yeah,
that pissed me off.
you're fine. You're fine. Then we get introduced to a police officer based on the credits. I'm assuming he's Officer Dorf. He shows up. I couldn't understand a word he said. but he seemed to be angry and hated youth.
The
That was
youths.
my impression. Yeah, the youths.
Yeah, I think of Schmidt whenever someone says youths.
So, from my understanding, based on interviews, it seems like they wanted at this point to establish that no one was going to help the kids if they called for help.
Hmm.
I honestly don't think this scene works very well and isn't particularly necessary, but good idea, bad execution. Like
Yeah,
it's not necessarily like it's a bad scene. It's just it's not doing what I think they meant for it to do.
I gotta be honest. I don't even remember this scene, and I just watched it the other day. So
I mean, understandable. And again, I couldn't understand like what the guy was saying, and not in terms of like his accent or mumbling, but like the word choice. Like I don't
hmm.
know what you're communicating.
Oh, okay.
Like I think you're talking about drugs, maybe, and you seem to be angry for reasons. I don't know what's happening, but all right. But it's that whole purpose is undone because we do meet another officer later
Right.
who is a perfectly fine person that I'm sure they were able to call for help, which they weren't. And that's really the only reason you would need to establish that no one's going to come to help them. I've seen it done better in other movies. Okay, it sounds dumb, but seriously, this is done very well in Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
I have not seen that.
I didn't think
So
you had, but it's done really well when you establish that these kids come in, they report something outlandish. The cop just hates young people. He assumes they're lying. He doesn't like their friends, so he assumes that they're playing a prank. He's a drunk. And so when people are making calls about similar things, he just thinks because of the earlier situation that they're all just
right.
pranking him, and he doesn't investigate at all because it's been previously established that it was kind of a boy. He assumed it was a boy called Wolf situation. So I think that's kind of what they were trying to do here. They just didn't do it well.
Hmm.
Anyway, yes. Oh, but I kind of wanted to mention that in terms of like modern horror, we don't see a lot of like new slasher movies. That's just not what's popular, and I think they're kind of difficult to do nowadays. And I also think you don't want to do the mad slasher now, which was
Hmm.
the craze at the time because of Halloween. The whole idea of someone being mentally ill and a serial killer is just factually incorrect, and I think now it plays a bit. It's not offensive, but it's like it's in bad tastes,
Yeah, for sure.
and it just doesn't work. But also, I do think in addition it's just difficult to get people isolated for a slasher, but the woods, I think, is the one place where you can really still do that because even if your cell phone works and you get reception, it could be hours before someone gets to your isolated location.
Right. Yep. That's a really good point.
So that's like if you are doing a slasher, I do think having it be at a camp or going on a hike is the right place to do that in a modern setting where no one's gonna get to you. Or I guess on a radio tower. Fall was pretty good. Wasn't a slasher, but that'd be an interesting one to do.
So what about what was the new Kevin Williamson one from last year, the year before?
Sick?
Yeah, Sick. Is that a slasher?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, and that's at a cabin.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah, definitely. And that works. See?
mhm.
Okay, so then we cut to Alex gets a jump scare of Ralph coming out of, I really couldn't remember the word for pantry, a food closet. I was like, oh, Lord,
Food
kids.
closet.
Yeah, it's a pantry. And
Yep.
Marcy and Ted come in, and Ralph again. We're kind of getting a repeat of him continuing to warn people. The place is cursed. You gotta leave. You're all doomed. Doomed. Just being a harbinger of death. And
Mhm.
then we see him right away on his bike. But what's interesting is, like, I noted this earlier. We know the killer drives a Jeep, so we know
Yes.
he's not the killer. I think this is prior to horror movies trying to do a whodunit, which I think they started doing because of Scream. And I honestly don't like that aspect of them, if I'm being
You
honest.
don't. I love it. But wait, so is this was not supposed to be a whodunit then?
No, not at all.
Because it when you watch it, it kind of seems like they're trying to frame it as one, but then you don't
In
the
what way?
person it just like so because you don't see the killer. So they're like establishing this mystery, like, oh, who could the killer be? And like it should be someone that you know. I get that's just what you're assuming while you're watching it. But then once the killer's revealed, it's someone who you hadn't even seen up until that point. That's just the way I interpreted it.
So my opinion, I could be super duper wrong for whodunits. I think I will not call a movie a whodunit unless the audience has a way to actually figure out who done it.
Oh, okay.
So even in something it seems kind of obvious like Clue, I'll call Clue straight up comedy. It's not a whodunit because the audience will not be able to figure out who done it.
Okay.
That's just a personal opinion. I
I've
think you
never
have
thought
to
of
have
it that
funny
way,
clues.
but I like it. I mean, that's a good way to
Like
think about
Knives
it.
Out is a whodunit.
Right.
That's just a personal opinion. But this movie, I don't think it was in any way, shape, or form trying to be a whodunit. They may
Okay,
have
yeah,
tried to
I
have
wasn't
some
sure, so
misleads,
that's why I asked.
some misleads or stuff, but I don't think it was trying to any
Okay.
capacity. I could be wrong, but that's just not the interpret. That's just not what I think they were trying to do. I think also I don't know if you've seen any giallo films.
If I've seen what?
Giallo.
No.
So giallo is a subgenre of Italian horror. Some people just call all Italian horror giallo. That's not okay. That's not accurate. If you're being actually specific, it's a specific subgenre of Italian horror where you have a killer. And it's usually someone who's wearing black gloves. It's very common black gloved killer. And usually you don't see their face. It operates very similar to this. And I think that was just kind of the established like way to go about having these movies.
Okay.
I think Halloween was kind of unique in that it gave you the information about the killer from the get-go because you have Donald Pleasance there as Dr.
Yeah,
Loomis. So we know from the beginning who the killer is.
sure.
And that was kind of rare. That wasn't really generally what you would do.
Hmm.
Usually the
Interesting.
killer is the reveal.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know the killer should always be the reveal. And I do think Scream was pretty smart in trying to make it a whodunit because when you have the killer being a reveal, it just kind of it lends itself towards whodunit.
Right.
But that's just something that they didn't really do, and I'll explain why I think they framed it this way. It's because they
Okay.
didn't want you to know the killer was a woman,
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
and that's just my theory, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure that's right.
Yeah.
Um. Anyway, so then we cut to Jack and Marcy. They're kind of at a lake. They're kissing. They're watching the storm. We get to get a little bit of we get to I wouldn't say we get backstory on them, but we get a little bit of character with them, and we kind of start to like. This is a scene to start to like them more. Meanwhile, Ted is kind of watching and walking around, and he sees someone goes into a cabin. So he follows them in, calling, "Hello, can I help you?" He seems a little worried, but like concerned, I guess. Kind of a difference between him is like when he's around people, he's very loud, he's very obnoxious, he's playing tricks. But when
Hmm.
he's off on his own, he's kind of quiet, and seems a lot more uh, nice, I guess is a good word for it.
Sure.
He is killed off screen, and I wanted to note he didn't have sex in this movie, and he's killed off screen. Note to people two people who've had sex. One was killed on screen, one was killed off screen. Two people have not had sex, and one was killed on screen, one was killed off screen.
Hmm.
I don't know why this matters to me, but it
Yeah. Is
does.
there some kind of conclusion coming from that, or
Perhaps
okay?
I'll get there. So Jack and Marcy run inside when it starts to rain. They go, they do things, they get intimate,
Hmm.
right? And then Marcy leaves to go to the bathroom. Kevin Smith as Jack is smoking a cigarette in bed, and we get what's probably the
Wait,
most
wait, 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 wait,
memorable.
wait, wait. I think you just said Kevin Smith.
I did say Kevin Smith 100%. Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Kevin Bacon, because I was about to say he was smoking, and I think my brain just went to
Yep.
Kevin
It's
Smith.
all good. It happens.
Okay, so he's smoking, and we get what's probably the most memorable death scene in the movie. We have Ned's body's above him, and it starts dripping blood because he's on a bunk bed. So he goes to, look, and then a hand comes out from under the bed, grabs his forehead, and arrow comes through his throat. from my understanding, it's a pretty easy thing to do,
Oh,
like effect to do. And Tom Savini has done it. He'll go on to do it quite a few times. If
sure.
you watch enough of his movies, this seems to be a pretty effective and one of his favorite kills. And I think it's a really good one. And we really see Jack dying up close and personal with the effect, with the blood. It's a very, very good effect. I think it's the best kill in the movie.
I agree. Yeah, not even close. It's a phenomenal kill. The arrow through the neck is like one of the most iconic things from the Friday the 13th movies. And that's one of the things I did remember from watching it, even though it had been so long. I want to go back a second though, because I also really like the part where, what are their names again? Jack and Marcy. When they were getting intimate, and then it panned up to I can't remember who was it, Ned?
Yeah.
To his dead body. That was a really cool moment too. And then like the mom, it was like sped up, and the score, I thought that was really awesome. That was a cool scene.
I hadn't noticed the speeding up.
I'm pretty sure it was, if I remember correctly.
I'll take your word for it. I believe
Yeah.
you. But yeah,
I thought that was really cool.
Again, the having the sound effects and the scoring work for this film was pretty darn good.
Yep.
So then we follow the unknown killer with the scores. They go to a different cabin, stalking Marcy, who's in the bathroom. I don't know why she has a Katharine Hepburn impression, but she does. I'm not that's supposed to make her endearing or not, but all right. She thinks she hears something and thinks it's like Jack or Ned. I understand because Ned's out here being a douchebag, or he was. R.I.P. Ned.
Right, was.
And then I really like this kill because she is kind of standing at a doorway and she's facing the camera. We see the shadow of the axe raise and hit a lamp before going into, she's now turned around and screaming, and hits her in the head. The face. Head, you know what I mean. And Tom Savini talks about this in interviews a lot, and I think it's really, really effective. So you have the real axe being raised to hit the lamp, so the audience can see I don't know if this makes sense. They can see the weight of the real weapon.
Sure.
And then they cut to the fake weapon going through her head with the effect.
Ah, that's really cool.
But because it happened so fast, it all seems like it's one motion.
It's seamless.
Together. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a way for the audience to get a more real visceral idea of the weapon. I think it's very, very smart and effective, and a lot of horror movies employ this tactic. The number of swinging lights you'll see in a horror movie, my God.
Yeah, that was a really good scene, and I'm glad you kind of explained it here, because when I was watching it, I was a tiny bit confused about what exactly happened. So, but it was really effective and well done.
I also really, I just always love the use of shadows in movies.
Yes.
It's great. It's just good looking.
Yep.
So we have two characters who had sex and both were killed on screen. Anyway, moving forward. I do want to talk about the sex equal death part. I'll talk about it right here.
Okay.
But I won't go too in depth because it's a long conversation. But Miller had gotten the idea, as I said earlier, from Halloween. But I wanted to say what Carpenter's quote, and I'm quoting him from Real Terror. It wasn't my intention to make a moral point. The other girls were busy with their boyfriends. They were distracted. Lori had the perception of the killer because she's not distracted. She's lonely. She's looking out the window. So I honestly don't think Friday the 13th is what established sex equals death. I'm sorry, I don't think Halloween did.
Oh,
Friday
okay.
the 13th did.
Yep.
And I think they did because they made it explicit that was part of the killer's motives.
Right.
She's mad that the counselors didn't, save her son because they were having sex, supposedly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so she sees the sin factor, as Randy will call it, and Scream,
right.
Of doing drugs, drinking, having sex. Those are distractions, and they're distracting people from doing what they should.
Don't you know the rules?
Yes. They're distracting, them from what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does unintentionally being what every horror movie ultimately is, which is a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
And that's be aware of your surroundings, kids. Mm-hmm. Also save drowning children.
Yes, definitely do that.
But then you have kids like Ned, and as you said earlier, what's his name from The Sandlot?
Squints.
Squints, who fake it, little bastards. Now we have boy called wolf situation. Now I just think that kid's not actually drowning. I'm not going to go in there and save him. He's
Right.
faking it. Oh, tragic. Anyway, I'll move past it. Alice, Bill, and Brenda are in another cabin by a fire. Bill's playing guitar. I don't understand how everyone in the 80s knows just automatically how to play a guitar, but fine, I'll go with it. Don't understand the people who love playing guitar by a campfire. I've never seen that in real life, and I go camping all the time. Move past it. So they're smoking grass, as they call it, drinking beer, playing strip Monopoly. Don't know how that works, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I don't quite get it either.
Brenda ends up leaving to run through the rain to go to her cabin, and Alice and Bill are left alone. I feel like they were trying to establish that Bill had a bit of a crush on Alice, but clearly Alice is with Steve already. Come on, guys. Yep. We cut to Steve. He's at a diner drinking coffee, talking to the diner. I don't know if she just works there or she owns it. Sandy. He says he has 6 counselors he needs to get back to. I like that it establishes Camp Crystal Lake as being kind of a small town where everyone sort of knows each other. He's clearly a Crystal Lake native. He also has a green Jeep. This is important. And I like that nothing is established in this movie that doesn't come back around to being important later. Like, it's a very tight script. And I don't think it gets, the respect for that it kind of deserves. Like, it's pretty well written, I think. So then he gets kept up by a cop here. And this one does a little bit what I'm saying. In that earlier, the cop we meet is kind of a douchebag. Yep. He's not going to help these kids if they call for help. But this cop, Tierney, Sergeant Tierney, clearly a higher ranking officer, I'm assuming a sergeant's higher than an officer. He seems like a really nice guy. He's talking to Steve about the full moon and Friday the 13th and bringing out the worst in people, so on, so forth. It's weird that there are a lot of studies about like crime and, people being in hospital rates are higher during the full moon.
Really?
That's what studies show. I don't know. I'd have to go and find some of these studies, but I've definitely seen that being reported. So I'd have to look deeper and see what their methodology for this research was.
That's interesting. I never thought there was anything to that, but
I don't know. I mean, I've heard nurses talk about that. I don't know. All right, so Brenda is in the bathroom, brushing her teeth. She seems like she's concerned, maybe she can sense someone around. She's getting a little uneasy. We cut to a scene where we're watching Brenda through the window. I always like these scenes because to me they're very voyeuristic.
Yep.
And it definitely puts the audience, in that kind of voyeuristic position where clearly we are watching this character in a way that it seems like we're not supposed to.
Right.
You get the feeling that we're distanced and we're doing something we're not supposed to be doing, which I like.
And they do that a lot in this movie and really well, too.
Yes. Then Brenda hears what sounds like a child crying, "Help me," from a distance, and she's lured out to the archery field, which I quite like. I think it was a pretty well done scene. Although, I don't know, Miss Voorhees. Clearly she's a counselor who would have gone and saved Jason. She didn't deserve to die. She's going out in the rain to try and save a fake child. Clearly she's a good counselor. What you doing?
Yep.
And we do not see her die, but we do hear her scream. So she didn't have sex, and she gets an off-screen death.
Yep.
All right. Moving right along. So Alice is alone by the fire playing the guitar. She feels like she maybe heard the scream, and it maybe have been Brenda, and she thought she saw the lights of the archery field. Come on. Bill comes back, and they decide to go in the rain to look for Brenda. They can't find her. They can't find Jack. They can't find Marcy. No one gives a fuck about Ted. I guess that's fine. I keep calling him Ted. His name is Ned.
Ned, yep.
Nobody cares about poor Ned because he makes too many jokes. See? Don't be making jokes. Don't be playing pranks.
Don't be pretending to drown.
Exactly. They find a bloody axe in the bed tucked in, which is bizarre.
Yeah, that's strange.
And I like that they take it seriously. They don't just they do think something is wrong and that they do need to find their friends and they need to get out of there. They need help.
Yep.
So they're not just thinking like this isn't important, like this is a joke. They don't just think it's poor Ned. Like they are taking it seriously. They, go to check around. Alice is very worried. They end up going to the office. She breaks the window to get in. The phone is dead. The payphone doesn't work. I guess. I don't know why the payphone doesn't work. I don't know how you cut that.
It's because it's a horror movie, of course.
Yeah, but I do like that we established that, there's no way for them to call for help.
Right.
Which continues to make that original scene with the cop more and more irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So the cop that Steve is with drops Steve off because there's been some sort of like head-on collision and he drives away. Steve seems to be very near Camp Crystal Lake. When he gets to the signage, he runs into someone holding a flashlight at the camera, so we can't see their face, but he does seem like he knows that person. Then it cuts away.
Off-screen
Meta
death.
Blom. Supply that he's killed. Again, no sex, off-screen death.
Yep. And you already touched on this a little bit, but what I loved about this scene is the fact that Mrs. Voorhees, shines the light in his eyes so that, while also shining the light in the audience's eyes so that we can't see who it is. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, it's good framing.
Yep.
It's a good use of darkness and light to ensure that we don't know who the killer is.
Yep.
But we could have them in frame.
Yeah, that was really clever how they did that.
So the killer cuts the power. I'm assuming they cut the phone line before they cut the power, which seems like it wouldn't be in the same place, and they should have done that all at once, but that's all right. All right, we live and we learn.
Yep.
Until we get our head cut off, as you do. Bill goes and checks on the generator. It's like fishing, really. She just lured him in. She's like, if I cut the power now, he's going to come and check on it. Maybe that's why she didn't do that earlier, and she just cut the phones. I don't know. Anyway, Alice stays in the office to sleep. Never split up, kids. There's our Scooby-Doo lesson of the day. Never split up. Bill tries to get the generator working, and we don't see Bill again. Poor Bill. Yep. Well, I mean, we do, but not alive.
Right. We see his dead body. Yep.
Alice wakes up with a start, which is a jump scare, and I think normally I'm not a big fan of jump scares, but I think that this is kind of the right way to do it, where Bill is looking around and it cuts to her waking up from a dream shouting Bill.
Yeah, I like that. I thought it was effective.
And earned.
Yes, for sure.
We understand why that happened. So Alice, I think she starts making coffee or tea. I don't know. I like coffee. I pay attention to these things. But it's that horrible instant stuff, and I just feel so sorry for her. If, Mrs. Voorhees doesn't kill her, that coffee would have, She also starts looking around in a scene that I personally feel was straight ripped from Halloween, where she just starts finding dead bodies that were clearly propped up to be on display.
And I think, if I'm remembering the correct scene, which I think I am, I think the score even sounds kind of like Halloween in this scene as well. I don't know if you noticed that. But
I did not. I believe you, but that would be funny if it did. Yeah. So it's very the final girl. She's finding all of her friends' bodies now, and she knows something definitely. She already knew something was wrong, but now it's confirmed, and we get a lot of confirmed off-screen kills. We find Bill, who I'm going to use it like a verb. He was arrowed to the door.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, well, Bob was too in Halloween, although it was just a singular knife.
Yep.
It's very reminiscent of that, I think.
Definitely is.
Then she starts, screaming and crying and running through the woods. But I do like that we see. I kind of feel like they're trying to establish she was resourceful. However, they kind of undid it with how they established that. So she goes into this cabin and she opens the door out, meaning it swings out open. She closes it and she ties a rope around the knob to the rafters in the ceiling. That way no one else can pull the door open in because it opens out. But then she starts barricading the door as if the door opens in. but it
Oh,
doesn't open in, it opens out, so that's pointless, and I've definitely seen this in an episode of Scooby-Doo where
huh.
Scooby and Shaggy push a dresser up against the door, but the door opens out, not
Yep, I
in, so
definitely
the
seen that in Scooby
yeah,
Doo. Yep.
so the mask guy just opens the door still. It's like, you gotta work with what you're doing, and I will say this, I feel like maybe a lot of people don't know it. If it's a I don't know how this works with cabins, but if you're in a building, a door to the outside will always open out to the outside because of fire regulations. It can't open
Oh,
in because if
right.
there's a fire, you don't want the door to open in because it can create a bottleneck and lock people in because
Yes.
there won't be door to room to open the door
Yep.
in towards you.
So
So
um I didn't notice the door thing when I was watching it. I just went
I
completely over my head.
rewound it 3 times to make sure I was seeing what was actually
Yeah.
happening.
Completely missed it. Great observation.
I thought it was funny. I don't know if maybe it was supposed to be a joke or if it was to take up time.
Maybe.
Or I think ultimately, I think it was just supposed to show that she was smart, but it kind of undid that by showing that she's kind of dumb. But I mean, I
Yeah.
guess if
So,
it could just be putting things in the way of the door to, like, if someone opens the door, it'll take them longer to come through. They can't just
sure,
walk
sure.
inside. You
Yeah,
have
that
to
makes
get it
sense.
open.
So you think it was intentional then?
I
Like it
don't
wasn't a
know.
mistake on the
I think
filmmaker's
it
part?
was a mistake,
Okay.
but I'm just trying to logic it.
I bet it's in the goofs of the IMDb. I bet it's in there. Do you ever look at that?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, it's probably in there.
Then she starts to close a lot of the blinds so no one can look in, but she doesn't close them all. And in fact, the one of the blinds she doesn't close, the killer throws Brenda's dead body through the window and Alice freaks out. And this is where we see a Jeep. The same
Mhm.
Jeep Steve Christie drives. So she thinks it's Steve and she runs out only to find it's not Steve. It's I'm Mrs. Voorhees. And it's about an hour and 15 minutes in. And where we finally meet Mrs. Voorhees, and the killer is ultimately revealed. She's an old friend of the Christies, and she seems like a nice older woman in the kind of white, very thick knit turtleneck sweater.
Mhm.
She looks like, someone you could trust that you don't think is going to be harmful to you. And Alice goes running into her arms, sobbing, and and then we get the turn.
Yep.
She kind of thinks that Alice is just hysterical. She goes in to look and she sees Brenda's dead body for herself and gasps. We get the exposition dump.
It's a tough word.
It is a tough word, and I'm very dehydrated. She's like, "Oh my lord, so young, so pretty. What monster could have done this? Gee, I wonder." Oh God, this place. Steve should have never have opened this place again. There's been too much trouble here. Did you know that a young boy drowned the year before those two others were killed? The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love with that when that young boy drowned. His name was Jason. I was working that day that it happened, preparing meals here. I was the cook. Jason should have been watched every minute he was. He wasn't a very good swimmer. Oh yeah, and then we realized Mrs. Voorhees a little unhinged,
Mhm.
a lot unhinged.
Yeah, this is a great scene. I think everything from the moment Betsy Palmer shows up through basically the rest of the movie is really, really good. And I don't know if was the audience supposed to believe that she was innocent or not? Because I feel like they kind of make it obvious right away that she's the killer.
I
Because
feel
she
like it's
arrives in the Jeep.
obvious right away, but I
Yeah.
think we need Alice to not know,
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. So the
and that
audience knows, but she doesn't. Yeah. Okay. I think
yeah,
it's
and
a
that builds tension, right?
yep, for
Because
sure.
you know that she's with the killer, that she's in trouble, but you also know that she doesn't know that yet.
Right. Yeah. And this is like one of the best ways to deliver exposition because Betsy Palmer is just so good. As far as like acting in the movie, she's by far and away the highlight for me. And the little flashbacks that we get, and then she starts doing the little Jason voice is just super creepy and effective.
Definitely. Yeah, she starts like hallucinating Jason calling out to her,
Yeah,
saying something along the lines of help me, mommy." Um, and it's in. I don't think you know why this scene is really interesting, but maybe
I don't.
Do you know why this scene is interesting?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know what you're referring to, but go ahead.
Exactly. It I mean, people talk about this enough, so I think you probably know that Jason is one of those masked killers like Michael,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so Jason doesn't talk, right?
Well, he talked when he was a kid before he drowned, right?
It's interesting. It's a choice.
I think so.
So clearly, this movie's establishing that, and the sequels just decided that he was nonverbal.
Oh, well, I don't know. Well, he talks in Freddy versus Jason as a kid when they drown him. So I don't know. I guess they're not very consistent with that.
No, consistent. Oh, Kurt, he's sweet, sweet, sweet is Kurt. Nothing about these movies is gonna be
That's
consistent.
okay.
Anyway, yeah. So you see, Jason drowned on his birthday in '57, and now it's kind of clear that she's just becoming more and more unhinged as she's going through this dialogue, which I think is really great. She's becoming kind of more angry, and she pulls a knife on Alice. Alice hits her with a fire poker, I think, and runs in the cabin. And then we get this really, I honestly thought maybe a little bit too long of a cat and mouse game. I feel like it lasts it was over 15 minutes. It was really long of them kind of, running from place to place, having kind of physical altercations. Pamela Voorhees is having more hallucinations, and she starts hearing Jason and talking. It's, to me, kind of Norman Bates from Psycho.
Definitely.
I do like that Alice hides in a pantry, and Mrs. Voorhees,
Food
I think she
closet.
uses the axe. Oh, okay, broom closet, and she uses an
No,
axe.
no. Never mind. I said food closet. I was
Yes,
making
food
fun of you from
closet.
before.
Anyway, so she uses an axe and cuts down the door, I think, or she uses something and it cuts through the door, and it was giving very Jack Torrance from Shining.
Yes.
Which is interesting because that movie actually came out 2 weeks after this movie on May 23rd, 1980. So I guess they just really liked people peeping through a hole in the door back in 1980.
Apparently.
I actually never made that connection until I was watching it this time, and I thought that was kind of funny. Mrs. Voorhees is just totally having a psychotic episode on the full moon on her son's super unlucky birthday. Eventually, Alice kind of starts to sit on a boat. Mrs. Voorhees and her have a fight again, hits her with a frying pan. People don't take frying pans seriously as a weapon. And let me tell you, if someone hits you over with a cast iron skillet, you're out. You're so out. You're laid out. I think that might have happened in one of the in the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween.
Oh,
That
I
he
wouldn't
hits
know. I haven't
that
seen it.
he hits and I actually really like this scene. He hits I'm completely blanking on her name. Not Lori's. Judith's boyfriend with the cast iron skillet, I think. And it's a very visceral scene. Ends up having a seizure because he's
Oh,
been hit
wow.
on the head so hard. Then that's likely more realistically what would happen. It is kind of giving a little bit, Texas Chainsaw Massacre when Leatherface just opens the door and hits the guy with, I think it's a meat cleaver.
Yeah.
And not a meat cleaver, a meat pulverizer. That big, bulky. It's almost like a mallet, but it's metal.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I know what
Yeah,
you're talking
I
about.
think he hits him with one of those, and the guy just goes down and kind of seems to start seizing because it's really severe head trauma. You're done if you get hit with that for days. Anyway, they have a really intense fight. They're rolling on the ground, they're hitting each other, biting each other. It's a fight. It's so funny that they got Betsy Palmer to do this.
Yeah, I know.
But Alice ultimately gets a machete and cuts off Mrs. Voorhees' head, which I thought was a pretty good effect, where we still see her hands kind of moving as if to grab her head, which is now severed from her body, because you still have those muscle movements for a few seconds afterwards. While the blood flow is still there. It's I think a really good effect.
Yeah, I agree. I think it holds up really well. It looks great, and that whole sequence, like I said, is super intense. And the killer mommy, that stuff is just so eerie.
Yes, definitely agree. Definitely agree. It she does Unhinged really well.
Yes,
I wish she had been in more horror movies.
I agree. She's great.
But I think she was usually like playing the kind of next door neighbor type. So this was really like surprise casting, I guess you could say.
Playing against type. Yeah.
Yes, and I from like what I've heard, and this is a very common story amongst you'll hear it in interviews whenever people are talking about this movie. She did this movie to because the check paid for a car for her that she wanted. So
I
that's
did
why.
see that. Yep.
Alice ends up going back into the boat, pushing off, and she's just kind of drifting on the lake until daylight, seemingly kind of lethargic, and I'm assuming just like heavily traumatized by the events of the
Oh
night.
yeah, absolutely.
In the morning, we see the police arrive, and they're trying to kind of call out to her, but we don't hear them because it's just playing over this really dramatic music. And then we get the jump scare of a child, Jason, jumping out of the water to grab her. Now, did you find that surprising?
Um
Or did you know that scene
I
already?
this time I knew about it, but I don't remember if I found it surprising the first time. I can't say, it's been too long. But I did remember it, so yeah, I knew it was gonna happen this
Would
time.
you say it was an effective jump scare?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I think so too. And then we get the post jump scare twist that she's waking up in the hospital.
Mhm.
She's kind of hysterical, and she asks about the boy. There's another third cop there. I didn't catch his name. And he said they didn't find any boys. So then she says, then he's still out there, and kind of looks off to the distance, like almost at the camera, but not quite, where we have an overlaid limit image of the lake. And that's the ending of the film.
Mhm.
And then I just read this on Wikipedia, so but again, we've heard, like, if you listen to interviews, you hear this a lot, that the ending was heavily inspired by Carrie, um,
Yep.
Tom Savini, uh, Miller does not, but but Cunningham and I think even Miner have all said that they were the ones who thought of the ending. I think Victor Miller is the only one who's like, that wasn't in my script, and I didn't agree with it.
Oh, wow.
Um, I can't remember who it was. I can't recall, but I think it was Miller, and yeah, I think it's Miller who did not agree with making Jason the villain of the rest of the franchise. He's like, no,
Interesting.
he's dead. He was supposed to be an innocent victim in all this. He was not supposed to be the victimizer, and doesn't agree with that. That's what they did. Going
So did
forward.
he just not wanna make sequels at all? Did he just want this to be a
This
one-off,
was the
or
only one he did.
okay.
Cunningham continued to work on them,
Mhm.
and Steve Miner continued to work on them.
Gotcha.
And in terms of the rights, there's a lot of dispute on rights for this movie.
Mhm.
Yes, like the remake is kind of surprising that they were able to. They essentially condensed the first four films in the
Yep.
remake. So it's kind of surprising that they were able to do that rights wise. I guess they did it at a period where everything was still owned by Paramount. Maybe I'm not
Okay.
sure. I'm not sure.
So what's the situation now?
I don't know. It's like it's legitimately so complicated. Like
Okay.
I couldn't unravel it for you.
Damn.
So I know they're making a TV show called Crystal Lake.
Yep, I heard about that.
It only has the rights to some of the stuff. So I don't necessarily know what's happening. I think
Well,
it's the first movie they have the
I know
rights.
there's been some, like, fan films that I've heard people have liked too. Have you
Okay,
watched any of
so
those?
yes, I've definitely seen Never Hike Alone.
Yep, that's the one,
Those
the main
There's
one I've heard
three
of.
of them, I think. Definitely two. I think there's three, but they do have Tom Matthews. Do you know who he is?
Nope.
So he plays a character by the name of Tommy Jarvis, and that character is in 4, 5, and 6, but he
Okay.
only plays him in 6.
Okay.
And I would personally say that he's my favorite character in this franchise,
Oh,
and he's my favorite portrayal of the character. If you have like Halloween has Laurie Strode,
yep.
right? Scream has a
Sydney.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Let's be true. Let's be
Well,
fair.
Sydney's like the main one though.
Yeah.
And then
Well, is she? Because I feel like
yeah.
Gail and Dewey are just as much, particularly Gail. But yeah, Sydney. There's a heavy
And
focus
then
on
like
her.
Nightmare on Elm Street has Nancy.
Yeah, but if this franchise has anyone, it's Tommy Jarvis.
Gotcha.
And I think it was kind of disappointing that they didn't continue his story in 7. Might be a rare person. I actually love 7, and I think that they definitely should have continued that character story in 8, which they did not. I really don't know what their decision was on that at all. It's yeah, they I feel like they really
Is
dropped the
7 the
ball.
one where it's not Jason?
No, that's 5.
Oh, okay.
But Tommy Jarvis isn't that one.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I think they were kind of trying to do what Halloween 4 and 5, well, 4 was setting up to do, but didn't end up doing, which was making the kid, and it's kind of ripping off Halloween still. It's like, it's that scene where you have the kid at the end who
Mhm.
seems to be picking up the mantle for the killer that they killed off, and that ultimately isn't what they end up doing.
Yep.
Um, for better or worse. I think for better. Like, I would not have liked that at all
For Halloween, you mean?
for any of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the idea that like I'm okay with it if it's like the opening is the kid seeing something happening and then they're the killer. But to do that in that this is our main character, they're the victim that we're following, and then suddenly they're the victimizer. I just don't like that
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. I
That's just
agree.
not it. But anyway,
Yep.
the ending was because they wanted like one last like jump
The
scare
one last
to leave
scare.
the
Yep.
audience with, like what Carrie did, and Carrie was pretty famous for its ending, which had come
Mhm.
out I think like 5 years before this movie.
And then it becomes like a super common thing. Like almost every horror Nightmare on Elm Street does it too a few years later.
Yes, definitely, absolutely, it does.
And that
Um,
was also there was also some disagreements amongst the creators with that one. So,
oh, definitely there
yeah.
was, and it all of the endings of those movies kind of don't make a lot of sense,
Yeah.
but I like them.
Yep. Same.
So to kind of wrap up, yeah, so Friday the 13th, thematically, it's about like motherhood. It's a good for her revenge story. We're seeing like the sin factor, and ultimately it's a cautionary tale. Miller, I'm quoting like Wikipedia, but
Mhm.
Miller was like the idea of someone's mother becoming a murderer whose only motivation is love for her child. It's very
Yep.
Scream too. This is
Oh,
exactly
absolutely.
why,
Yeah.
this is exactly what they were doing in Scream 2.
Yep.
He said goes on to say, I took motherhood and turned it on its head, and I think it was great fun. Mrs. Voorhees was the mother I always wanted, a mother who would have killed for her kids. And this movie is important for a lot of the reasons I was saying, is because what Halloween started, Friday the 13th, catapulted into the
The
mainstream
mainstream.
for
Yep.
wide audiences. And when we're getting to like the golden age of horror, which is the slasher boom from 78 to 84, Halloween was super important, but I think Friday the 13th ultimately ends up being the movie that their rules are what people took and ran with.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like most of the rules they talk about in Scream are from Friday the 13th. So,
Absolutely. And kind of incorrectly applied to Halloween.
yep, for sure.
So, like, how did you like this film? Like, where do you think it like ranks for you?
Well, as far as like the original movies for the big three, it's by far my least favorite. But I don't think it's bad. I think it's fine. I certainly recognize the impact that it has had. It is a masterclass in atmosphere and tension, mostly captured by the way it was shot with the POV stuff and the score. That's why the movie works. Betsy Palmer is phenomenal, and everything after she's revealed is great. But I think that pretty much all the characters besides her are pretty forgettable to me, including Alice. I mean, she's okay, but doesn't really stack up amongst like the best final girls or anything like that. And there isn't really much going on plot wise for a good portion of the movie. They're kind of just waiting around to get killed. Now it sort of works because, like you said, the POV shots that they do help to keep the tension. So I think it works a little bit better than it should. But I think it's a movie that I like, but it's got flaws for sure.
Yeah, it definitely has flaws, but I mean, considering they made it, inside of a month for
Oh, and
like,
the effects are great. I forgot to mention that the effects are great,
yes,
and the kill, especially the arrow kill.
Tom Savini is so talented.
Yep.
Yes. Dude, Tom Savini. I definitely think that this is an essential film for any horror fan, and it's also a lot better than people give it credit for. But it has such a high bar of the original Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street that it's
Mhm.
constantly in comparison with. And I don't think that people kind of give it's you haven't seen the franchise yet as a whole, but I think in
Right.
terms of the entirety of the franchise, this one I think is I mean, it's definitely my favorite, but I think overall it has because of the nature of what they were doing always being so much more ridiculous than Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween, which always seemed to take itself seriously. Friday the 13th never really did.
Mhm.
It ultimately, the lows in this franchise are nowhere near as lows as the Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Streets.
Yeah.
And the highs are just so fun.
Right.
So ultimately, I think it's tonally a much more consistent watch than the other two franchises,
I
personally.
could very well end up agreeing with you by the time we finish this franchise. I've heard good things about most of the sequels. People seem to like them, whereas Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween there tends to be they get pretty bad for a while. I haven't seen all those either, but that's I'm just going based on what I've heard. I stopped Nightmare after 4,
I
and I
I
heard
think
that.
the only bad one in this franchise is oh my god, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. I think
Okay.
is the only, like, bad one. And then, to being honest, if you are comparing it to all of the Halloween and all of the Nightmare movies, it's probably the worst of all of them.
Oh boy.
But again, because tonally, Friday the 13th is always so much more crazy and ridiculous,
Wait, it's worse than Freddy's Dead?
I like Freddy's
You
Dead.
do? Oh my
Yes.
god. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's
I'll
horrible.
stand on the hill, I'll die on the hill. And actually, I think that's a really interesting one because out of all of the Halloweens, all of
Mhm.
Nightmare on Elm Streets, all of the Friday the 13th, that is the only one that is directed by a woman.
Freddy's Dead?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And I do think that she brought something interesting to it. And when you read about the background from that point of view, I do think that enhances the watch
Hmm. Okay.
quite significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen clips of it, and I'm like, oh my god, what the hell is this?
Yeah, because with Nightmare on Elm Street, tonally, it just shifts. It's all over the place. And by the time you get to that one, it's just an outright comedy.
Well, to me, the peak of the tonally was 3. I think 3 captured the combination of horror and comedy really well. I think that was the perfect blend of like scary and funny Freddy.
Yes, in terms of blending those,
Yeah.
100% agree. Now, do you like horror comedies in general?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So my favorite is always going to be Return of the Living Dead. Have you seen that?
Nope.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's because Tom Matthews is in that, and he's the
Ah.
guy
Okay.
from. Actually, there are a few people in that film who were in Friday the 13th movies. And I would. In It's one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It is absolutely relentless. Once that movie starts in the opening, and once it starts, it does not stop. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's hilarious, but it's also like one of the most terrifying ideas of like death presented in a film. And it's so pessimistic, but it's funny, so it almost
Huh.
doesn't feel pessimistic. And it
Sure.
has one of
Okay.
the best scores in a it's one of my all-time favorite horror movie scores because like I've used it in like my we've talked about this. I've used it in my exercise playlist because it freaks me out.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
like listening to horror scores as well. That's something we've talked about before. It really gets me going. I love it. I especially like to listen to the Christine theme. And I like when I'm running outside at night and I pretend that the car is chasing me. It works really well.
I do the same with Michael Myers with the Halloween theme.
Yep.
And there's some pretty good remixes of that one
So
too.
effective. Any John Carpenter score really is going to be good for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I listen to he does music now and he released I think it's called Lost Themes. His third volume, Weeping Ghosts, is one of my favorite
Hmm.
songs. It's
Okay.
so good.
Nice.
Anyway, we'll go ahead and close out. Any final remarks you'd like to give, Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking me to do this with you. I've been wanting to do more stuff together, and once you brought this up, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is the perfect idea because now I have an excuse to watch all the movies." So I'm really looking forward to going through this franchise with you.
Yes, and we will be going brick by brick, movie by movie, machete kill by machete kill.
And these are all going to be first time watches now from here on out, all the way up until Freddy versus Jason. So
Which is like 10 movies from now.
yeah,
All
so
right.
it's going to be a lot of fun.
Hopefully. Okay. Thank you for listening and stay with the rainbows.